Hey guys and girls, thank you for joining me today. Hope we have a good time today talking about some glass, some cameras and some Nikon products. So today I'm going to have a discussion really about some wide angle lenses and my choices initially. We'll start off on that and we'll talk about some Nikon rumors and upcoming releases which sound very exciting indeed. So just to make it personal for the initiated, I've recently purchased these two lenses in the last 30 days. So what do I have? Well, we've got the wide 20mm 1.8 Z-line lens, and then we have the 35mm S lens too, the 1.8. Now I've actually owned both of these previously, and I thought, you know what I'd do? I'd try for about a year. I tried some zooms. So I particularly had the 17 to 35 for the wide range. It was the old D-style lens. It actually worked incredibly well on the Nikon mirrorless system because it had its own silent wave motor and it was able to function quite well, and the autofocus was great. The only disappointment with that particular lens certainly wasn't the focal range. 17 to 35 was amazing, but the problem was at 2.8 it was just a little soft. That's what I noticed. So I thought, I felt like I was compromising. Probably no one else would notice the difference, but I noticed that they weren't quite as sharp as the lenses I was familiar with using. And then I thought, well, I'll sell that one and I'll buy another zoom of some sort. So I looked into the new released 17 to 28 2.8, and that was really, it's a rebranded Tamron lens, which is no shame to Nikon at all. Nikon have accepted it and embraced it and made it their own with their own custom body and mount design and so on. So I have no doubt it's an amazing unit, and the part that it was designed by Tamron is no shame. Tamron is actually the largest lens manufacturing company in the world. So if you're thinking Canon and Nikon have got the market snitched up, well, you're quite wrong. Tamron outshine both of them together. So they are a large manufacturer and they make excellent products. So they make things for cameras, and not just photography cameras, but for security devices and all manner of different sort of lenses they manufacture and have done for years. And they make excellent products. So no way would I negatively feel anything about the lenses that they produce with now in harmony with Nikon. But what it is I just didn't find the range quite right. I needed something a little longer than 28, even though the 17 was more than adequate. The 35 end was missing, and I actually needed to then buy a 35mm lens anyway, because that is a very excellent focal length for me for video. So generally when I be filming as I am now in my room, I would actually be using a 35mm prime on this FTC camera. I'm using the crop sensor camera there. Beautiful retro design styled camera, but I'm using the kit lens on it now. It's the 16 to 50, which is an equal to a 24 to 70, and that's going to come up in our conversation right now. You see, I had this 17 to 35, just felt it was a bit soft, needed a different option. I also owned, of course, the 24 to 70 Z-mount f2.8. Now that is a magnificent lens, no doubt. Super sharp at every focal length, brilliant design and very high quality, high-end unit. Definitely pro-level lens, and its sharpness was astounding. Really, really good lens. My only downside on that lens was its weight and bulk. It was not dissimilar in weight and volume to this lens I have here. Now if I can just find the clip here. If I take that off, it gives you a better idea of the size. The 24 to 70 2.8 Z-mount lens was about this size and weight, and that on my camera just felt a bit heavy to have, say, in your bag for the purpose that it was. And let's face it, a 24 to 70 is really like a walk-around lens, a festival lens, or a sort of a do-all lens. But at that size and weight in the camera bag, it was just a bit bulky and heavy. And what I found was, as good as it was to use, I just tended to actually never pick it up out of the bag and use it because of the weight and bulk. So I thought, as a versatile lens, it really wasn't cutting it, and there was nothing else on the market that really grabbed my attention. Previously, I'd owned the 14 to 30, that was an f4. That was a great little zoom, but again, it just didn't impress me at f4. There were times when I needed something brighter and lighter, and I needed to isolate a subject, and that one just didn't cut it for me. So I found that I couldn't use the 14 to 24 because that was also big and heavy, or bulkier than I was after. So I decided to go with the primes as an option, because both of these primes, and now I've got 20mm here. So this is the 20mm lens, and it is a fantastic lens. As I say, I've owned it as soon as it was released. I bought it. I ended up selling it because I tried the zooms, and then I've come back to it yet again. So I find this lens actually one of the better Nikon lenses in the entire lineup, and I'll explain more detail of that very soon. The other option of that was great for a wide, but when I wanted to get in and isolate a subject a bit and get a bit of bokeh, I found that I needed something like a 35. And this one here is a 35 1.8 Z-mount lens, and this is also an excellent lens. I really love it for video particularly. So can you use it for photos? Well, of course you can. It's a great photography lens, but I found it particularly useful in the video arrangement because it is so light and compact. And all this is I keep raving on about lightweight. Why do I care about that? If you're on a tripod, does it matter? Of course not. You can have any weight lens you like if you're sitting on a tripod that's taking all the weight for you. The context I'm talking here about is about travel friendly and this baby here, the Ronin. When I want to mount a camera and a lens package to this, because it is basically a one-hand or very lightweight design, I'm after a lightweight package up top. So do I want something this weighs about a kilo and a half or something on my camera? No, that's just going to throw all the weight forward and it's going to be near impossible to balance. And that was the problem I was having with the 24-70. So what I've decided to do is go with these lovely little lightweight lenses, and now when I put that on the camera and put it on this Ronin stabilizer, it's very lightweight, quick to balance, and when I exchange from 20 or to 35, the weight difference is insignificant, and I really don't even have to bother rebalancing in any way because it's so very similar, there's negligible difference. So I can find if I can go from ultra wide to 20, take that off, put the 35 on and have beautiful imagery, exactly the framing and the subject separation I want, and don't have to fiddle around retuning the Ronin on the fly. And this is a big deal for me. I suppose it's like use case scenario, isn't it? My use case is I will take beautiful prime portrait photography with the same camera, the C7 II, and then I want to swap that straight onto the Ronin with a nice wide lens and get some video, and I'll go back and forth between photo and video, video and photo. And what that means is I need something that is appropriate for every time I use it. So if I take this lens off and I put one of these on and I want video, I want it to be light. When I have it in my hand and I'm taking portraits, the weight doesn't really matter to me too much. It's more about the quality of the lens and the quality of the image. So I could put up with the weight when I'm holding it. But when I'm holding this as well and trying to get smooth, silky footage, the lighter weight gear you have, the better the image ends up looking and the more comfortable it is as a user experience for yourself. So, so far I'm thinking that this is actually the best combination. Now I could use a lightweight lens, as I've said. I could use, say, the 17-28 we were talking about. That was actually quite lightweight. I think it was around 600 grams, or maybe it was 550. But either way, the weight wasn't really a problem with that lens. Had a great filter size, 67mm filter thread, which was fantastically convenient. That was also a good option. But it was also at f2.8. Now, a lot of people think of f2.8, you think about, well, pro-level lenses like the 70-200, for example, or the 24-70 2.8 I mentioned earlier. Now, they're fantastic lenses, but when you're trying to get isolation of your subject, the brighter the aperture you can get, the better. So if I can have a 1.8, that's going to be a little bit shallower and in dark situations, a little bit brighter than a 2.8. So the 2.8 can work, you can use a bit of ISO, you can use some lighting, but it just all became complicated and not ideal for my situation. So again, as I'm saying, this is not bagging any product. All the products are great and all have their own application. But for my situation, where I'm often using this as well, and I want to take advantage of the lenses in my kit and not have to have only one special lens for this unit, it was great to be able to use my other photography lenses as high-class, quality, nice shallow depths of field, video lenses as well. So what I'll do is I'll be showing you some samples of the video that I've taken recently. Now they're online on my YouTube channel anyway, but I'll just throw in a few little snippets of it and it'll give you an idea of what it looks like when I'm using a 20mm and what it looks like when I use a 35mm. Now a lot of people may think, oh, 35mm, that's a little bit narrow in there for stabilizing shots. Usually wider is better. The wider it is, the more stable it looks, and it's sort of easier to frame and get everything in focus. Well, that's true, but the 35 does give a very special image, particularly as you're getting close to a subject. So when you're framing subject or plural subjects and you're using the 35, you have to get back quite a way, that's true, and you really don't get a great deal of bokeh or separation. But as you're coming up and approaching a product, particularly getting a waist-high close-up shot or headshot, then it really pops with the subject separation and the bokeh in the background, and it makes for very cinematic and professional looking video. So when you can possibly use a longer focal length like 35 as an illustration, I highly recommend you do so with, say, f1.8. While we're talking about the 35 and we talk about new releases coming out, there has been announced that Nikon rumors anyway, that 35 or 1.2 will be released. Now, when is it released? I imagine early next year they'll make a product announcement, and probably by April, March it'll be available to purchase. It'll be every bit as good as this 50 1.2. Now this 50 1.2 is my favourite portrait lens at the moment. I absolutely adore this lens. 50 mils wasn't always my ideal focal length. In fact, when the 85 comes out, I'll probably pick that up because that is my favourite focal length for doing photos, particularly portraits and so on, where you can go in nice and tight on a headshot. You don't get a great deal of distortion. You're not bloating out the face. Wider the angle is, the more bloating sort of an effect you can get in distortion. The 50 actually handles that quite well, and I've been very happy with the images, but I tend to want to use this more for full body shots or for waist up, you know, bust shots. But when I want to do a headshot, I'm probably going to want to use maybe the 70 to 200, get back to about 150 mils or greater, and use the advantage of the compression, where I get a lot less in the background, I get great subject separation, and I get sufficiently amount of the face part in focus that both eyes are sharp, and that's very handy. I find with the 1.2, if you shoot at f50mm 1.2, you come in for a headshot, you are absolutely getting one eye in focus, and by the time you've got to the nose, everything's starting to blur out and get out of focus. So I find that you've got to be careful on the angles you take a photo with at f1.2. If you take a photo of someone head on, straight up, that's fine, as I am now. But once you start getting a little bit of a tilt, that's okay. But you get a lot of profile going on, and I'll tell you what, half that face is blurry and mush. So just be aware of that when you're purchasing these lenses and you're starting to apply them, that there are horses for courses, and also certain apertures may not be suitable for the angles of the head. So again, the 35 1.2 that will come out very soon sounds like an exciting option. But I'm not going to be using that on my Ronin because, again, like this 50mm here, it's going to be a big hefty beast. It'll probably be a little shorter, a little broader. I imagine that'll be the design, but at the same time still have a lot of bulk and weight to it. And I just don't think that, I think that'll be miserable on a hand stabilizer. Way too forward heavy, and dip it down and you'd be sort of struggling to hold it for any length of time. So even though you would get maybe a lovely image, it would be miserable to use. I would recommend that one for doing some sort of either studio videography or photography, where you can have everything on a tripod and have it nice and stabilized. That's when I think that would be awesome to have that lens. Handheld it would be okay. Tripod definitely, I think, if you're doing video, because it'd just get too tedious. So I like the idea of the 35. I think Nikon have done the right thing by bringing out a range of these f1.2 lenses. So yes, we've got the 50 right now here. We'll have a 35 very shortly next year. And then I think immediately after that release, the 85 f1.2 will be released to complete that holy trinity, if you like, of primes. So 35 I'm probably going to leave alone. I can't see myself wanting that one. And I do have a little 35 at 1.8, which is more than adequate for my needs anyway, for video. I think the 85 is the exciting option coming out soon to be released. 85 is a great portrait focal length. I've had no issue with that, and I think it gives a great and renders a beautiful image. I had the 85 1.8 for some time, the S lens, and I used that for probably 18 months. Since then I sold it when I got the 70 to 200 because that sort of focal length was covered, and at 1.8 there wasn't that much difference really in the image between an 85 at 1.8 and the 70 to 200. Let's say you set it at 150 mils at 2.8, well, the image basically looked identical and the subject separation was pretty much the same. So really it wasn't worth having both. And that's where it comes into the difference between, in your application, is actually the 1.8 or 1.2 or 2.8 relevant? Does it make any difference? So if you're filming moving subjects, for example, you're probably more than happy to have 2.8 if it's a fast moving object you're chasing with video. But if you've got someone pacing very slowly or a graceful slow movement, it's nice to have the widest aperture you can to get a nice subject separation and brightness. So the brightness factor isn't actually always a joy. let me just point something out to you. In all of my lenses that I have here for video, for example, I cannot have a lens at all for video unless I have a filter on it. Now you'll see it here that I have a filter. This one here is a Hoya, and it's the circular ND filter. So it goes from like a 2 stops to about 50 stops or something like that. So I can make it as dark and as light as I like, just for the simple twist of the wrist here, adjusting the light and darkness. And so that you really need for video, because when you're going outside and you're taking your video, you could be going from shady tree area to a bright sunny area, or maybe having to go inside where it's quite shaded and gets dark, and you need to adjust that very quickly. And look, it's not advisable to use ISO for everything. You think maybe that you could have one filter on and just adjust the ISO, but then of course the quality of your images is all over the place too. High ISOs create grain, of course, as you know. And it's nicer just to be able to rip that filter off and have a bright image at 1.8 when you go inside, and then put the filter on, and you can adjust it when you're outside in the bright light as you please at a moment's notice, rather than carrying a whole group of different filters. So this idea here of these Hoya, I like the Hoya Pro series. I think they're an excellent filter, high quality and good glass. And to be able to adjust the light or darkness in a little flick of a wrist there, that is amazing convenience. But you must have the filters if you're doing video with primes. That's sort of an essential. When I take the lens out and I'm doing video, I actually rarely use the hood. In fact, 9 times out of 10, I'll bring the hood. I'm not too worried about sun flare or whatever on the image. Sometimes that's actually a bonus and can make it look quite attractive. It doesn't really concern me. My main concern was the brightness. So having the filter controls that nicely. And what I'll do is I'll reverse the hood on in case I do happen to need it for whatever reason. That's, for example, filming directly into some bright light or sun, and that's handy if you need it. But this just keeps it more compact. It's easier to put in your camera bag. It's nice and light. You're never going to hurt the element because you've got the filter on the front anyway, and you can also always put the cap on. So I always have caps here with me. I can just put a cap on anytime I want if I want to protect it. So the filters are a great idea for protection, but mostly important for light and dark control at a moment's notice. And just look at how smaller and compact that is now. Imagine the 35 f1.2 in comparison, which would be about that size. Wouldn't that be hideous to carry around with you in your camera bag? So it's nice to have something beautifully nice, light and compact, very lightweight. This is like 350 grams, I think, weighs next to nothing. If we go on now to the 20mm, the 20mm I purchased because, as I say, I've had wide zooms before, but you know what, I just love the fact that it was a 1.8, and knowing that I can have a nice bright image if I go inside. I don't have to have lighting with me necessarily, but at the same time I get some options of some subject separation. Now, being realistic, any wide angle lens, anything from 14 to 24, you're really not getting a lot of subject separation, no matter what the aperture or what your proximity. But at 1.8 and being able to get reasonably close into your subject, and I'm exaggerating it here, but obviously the closer in you get, you will attain at least some subject separation at 1.8 and with a bit of proximity. So again, this has a nice big lens hood. This lens hood's actually pretty impressive for what it is. For a 20mm lens, a wide, that actually is going to be quite functional. Would I take this with me at all? No. I would never take the hood with me and use it in any form or fashion when I'm doing video with a 20mm. I just find you're just not going to need it, and it doesn't provide enough shade or cover, really. You would need a massive sort of a filter to help in any way at all over the top. So I find I just leave it off. I use the filters. This one here, I've got an ND Pro. I think it's a, what is it? 8 stop. This is an 8 stop one, and that's very, very nice and dark for outside in the bright. So I have here an ND4, ND8 and an ND16, and I can alternate between these. Can I use a circular ND? So I've got one filter. Yes, I can. I have one right here. It's a 82mm circular ND, and with a simple step up ring from 77 to 82, I can use the existing one I already have. I don't even have to buy another one, and just whack that step on ring, and I can use the circular ND for a one-stop solution to everything if I should want to. I have this one actually for my 50mm, which is 82mm filter thread, and I said with the step up ring it just makes it convenient, don't need to buy extras. So yes, I can use one filter. Often with video, however, if I'm in a single area, I know I'm going to be, for example, outside in a park. I know I'm going to be there for about an hour, maybe an hour and a half. I know what time of day it is. I can pretty much just select a filter, say an ND4 or an ND8 or 16, whatever it is, depending on the conditions of the day, and know full well that that filter is going to do me fine, and I don't need a multitude and I don't need to even adjust. I could just adjust maybe composition in post a little bit if the situation changes. But really I'm finding that the filters are very essential, and I just wanted to emphasize how important that is if you're doing any video outside, and particularly if you're roaming around with a Ronin and the situation can change on the fly. So our next subject for the day, we're just going to move on. You'll see that my Z7 II here has no lens on it, and that's because I'm just going to illustrate some things for you very briefly. And we are talking today about my practical experiences. Now I know that may sound selfish and egotistical, but no, it's actually about use case scenario. If I can illustrate to you what I do and how I do it, then you can also assess, oh, that's a good idea. If I go into that field of photography and video, I've already got a head start on what sort of products and tools I need to do the job. So I'm only sort of illustrating here about what I do, and hopefully that helps you if you happen to come across that circumstance. And I think you probably will. So what we've got here is I've got the battery grip on my Z7 II, which sort of makes it look a little bit like a Z9, I suppose, doesn't it? And it's a similar weight and volume and size to one. Obviously not the same performance. So what I've got here is the option of being able to take this grip on and off. It's just a thumb screw, bang, it's off, pop it on a screw, and the versatility of that is astounding. I actually like the battery grip when I'm using these two lenses. So when I'm using big heavy lenses, it's actually really cool to have the grip and have that counterbalance. Think of it as like a seesaw effect. You know, in old seesaws when you're at school, you know, you've got a center pin. If you've got here a heavy camera and a heavy lens, it balances quite well and it feels good in the hand. Yes, there's more overall weight, but the balance is so good that it actually feels more practical and comfortable. If you have a very light camera and then you have a big whopping heavy lens, what you tend to find is that it's very forward heavy and you're sort of feeling very uncomfortable all day. So the balance factor, the seesaw effect of having this battery grip with two batteries in it and bulking up this end of the camera makes having heavy lenses far more tolerable. So that's great when you want that and when you need it. So when I'm doing portrait photography, it's amazing to be able to hold everything very comfortably like this and not having to contort your hands all over the place to take a photo and be comfortable if you're doing portrait mode. So these battery grips are an excellent idea and I highly recommend them. For a couple $100, $500 I think they are in Australia, they're a very good value, and I do use it, but I like the fact that I can also not use it. And what am I referring to there? Well, this is a great tool. Imagine this is a Z9 and I want to now put it on my Ronin. Well, what happens now? Well, I've got this huge, big, bulky item on, haven't I? And it's sticking way up high, and it's going to sort of throw balance out, and it's going to tend to be very top heavy, and the balancing is very awkward. So being able to keep this a bit lower and get it onto the Ronin, where I can take photos and then snap it straight onto the Ronin here with the Arco Swiss mount, just makes everything very, very quick and easy without having these big height variations. So how do we get this thing off? Well, if I want to remove this thing, it's just a little wheel button at the back here. You just undo that all the way, and then it just pops off. Now, how quick was that? Putting it on is the same procedure. It's no harder. Got the little slot here, you got the pins. Obviously, you just pop it in here, and then you just tighten the wheel up. So it's very, very quick to put on and off when you need it. You've got two lots of batteries in there, which make it, of course, excellent for life when you're taking photos and videos. Very good for video because you're not constantly worrying about sucking the power out of the battery. And the video does consume a lot more battery power than photos do. You can have one decent Nikon battery in your camera to last you most of the day, but for video you get only an hour or two and then it's all gone. So you've either got to carry a lot of batteries with you, or you can have the grip, and that's sort of pretty handy. And of course the other advantage with the grip that you may not appreciate is that A, it's chargeable. So if you've got a battery pack, you can charge it up on the go. And secondly, of course, you can hot swap the battery. So even while it's running, you can pull a battery out, grab a new battery here, put the new battery in. I've got it the wrong way around. There we go. Put the new battery in while the camera's still running, assuming this is on a tripod and stable, and you didn't even have to stop shooting to make sure the battery power is 100%. So that's a fantastic option, the option of being able to fastly swap over batteries and keep the power running all the time you want it to. And it doesn't hold you up very long. So now what we've done is we've got a nice small form factor camera now. So when I'm using these lighter lenses, I have a nice light camera body. So I won't usually use it like this. What I'll do is I'll like to have my L brackets on, when I've illustrated these many times before. And that there's multiple value in these L brackets. One is, it is an Arco Swiss mount. It has two ways of Arco Swiss mounting. So if you want to take portrait photography on a tripod, you can. You just bolt it to there and the camera's sitting in portrait mode, and that's very convenient. And when you want it flat, you've got a a grip for down the bottom here as well. But the other advantage of this is it's all aluminium. It's quite sturdy and strong, and that provides a lot of impact resistance too. If I'm going to knock something with the camera, I'm more than happy to knock this, which is a $100 item, than I am start smashing around my $5,000 camera. So that's a much better option. So how do we fit it? Well, it's actually very simple. It's almost exactly the same, if you like, as fitting that battery grip, only that they provide you an Allen key that makes it very simple. So here we go. We've got it in position now. Quick twist of the Allen key. Just make sure it's tight. It doesn't have to be super tight, just has to be fastened. Put your little Allen key back into the magnetic slot it gives so you don't lose it. It's always there for next time. That's convenient. There you go. So I can put a battery in here now. Now you might say, oh, well, you know, where's the battery door? Well, that's actually on the grip. I'm not going to muck around with the time, but the battery grip actually stores your little handle, and then you can put your door in, clip it back in when you're good and ready. So it just keeps it there nice and sturdy and safe for you. But right now, for illustration purposes, I don't need the door. It doesn't make any difference. That battery's going nowhere. It's locked in. So we were just talking about here about compacting the camera down with an L bracket rather than the battery grip that I'd recently shown it with. And the battery grip, of course, is excellent when you've got the heavy lenses, but when you want to put some light lenses on and you want to use this camera for the Ronin, the stabilizer, and you need to bring the weight and size down a bit to make it all more convenient, I can use my ZFC, of course, which is a lightweight camera. And I might add that the lens on that camera right now, the 16 to 50 kit lens, which is a zoom, and it has image stabilization in that lens too, which is a great bonus. That actually is quite good for the image stabilization. But of course, even though it's handy and that it's a 24 to 70 and that it's wide enough to do the video, I just still prefer to have the option of the wide aperture f1.8s to get some subject isolation and brightness when I wish. But that doesn't mean that lens and that camera is not usable on the Ronin and works very well. And the flip out screen, of course, is an excellent option to make things visible. But I tend to use the Nikon Z2 when possible, mainly for the option of the 4K at 60 frames per second, which I can't get in the ZFC. And so I like to shoot everything at 4K where possible, and shooting it at 60 frames a second just means then that when I see a scene that I think, oh wow, you know, that's going to look beautiful, nice slowed down and in smooth motion at 60 frames a second slowed down, then I got that option in any scene I want. And I can get that with this camera here. So when I want to put this onto the Ronin there, I can use, of course, the grips in any way I fashion. I'm going to use this here most likely, and I just want to illustrate the changeover now convenience. So we talk about zooms, and zooms are very convenient where you have one lens on the unit and you can just go from 17 to 28 or whatever the range is, 14 to 24 very quickly with a flick of a wrist, and that's great for your zoom range. But when I want something super light and I want that nice wide aperture 1.8 effect, well then I can use these two lenses in harmony on the one camera body on the Ronin. So I just want to demonstrate swapping that over and how it does actually function and work. What you do really is when you're balancing the rig, balance it with both lenses on and just find that mid-range, because there is a slight weight difference. Now the weight difference is insignificant. This is about 350 grams, this is just under I think 500 grams, so they're all around the 400 gram mark. So what you do is you put a couple of filters on the bigger one and the hood on, and then balance it for that, and so that when you either swap from this one to that one, the weight difference is insignificant, and you'll find that therefore you can easily balance them. So I just want to physically demonstrate that rather than just yap, 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 talk about it. Let me show you that this actually does work. So we'll go from the lightest one first. So let's have a look at the 35 here. 35 does have a filter on it, of course, and it does have the lens hoods. They all add a little bit of weight, and it just sort of helps in the balancing it up mode, I suppose, doesn't it? So let me just get that lens on. There we go. And if I put it on its mount here, and this is actually quite tricky unless I get the right angle of view. So I'm just going to clip that in there, just whacking it on now. Make sure it's in the appropriate balanced position. There it is. Now let me just turn that on. And there we go. And what we've got now is a nice, fully functional Ronin, well balanced and capable of being used instantly. And it's nice and light. You pick it up with one hand, it's not a big deal at all. The Z7 II, of course, is a full frame unit, but you know what, that doesn't make any difference because it's quite light. When it's compacted down, the battery group is off. It's actually quite a modest weighted item, and with this light lens at about 350 grams, it's a fantastic system. So it's very lightweight, you get a nice bokeh effect, and with a filter on, of course, you control the light from that bright aperture. Now that's all very well for this. What about when I want to put the 20 on? Is that going to throw everything out? Well, let me just illustrate how it does not. So I'm just going to turn that off and make it safe and rigid. All right, it's nice and safe. We'll remove this lens. Just put it down here, put the cap on. We'll put the 20mm on now. Now it's a different size and structure of lens, but the weight is similar enough. It's not exactly the same, but it's close enough that it will work. So just make sure that's clicked in. Now we turn it on. And there we go. And see, that's beautifully balanced straight away. And again, it's fully functional. I can use that as I wish, and that'll work fine. I can go from, as you just saw then, I can go from 35mm to 20mm at a blink of an eye in a moment's notice, and all that luxury of the bright aperture and the different focal lengths in a blink of an eye very quickly. So I just wanted to run you through that and show you how functional it is and the relevance of, horses for courses. How strong or heavy or what weighted a lens and combination is relevant to the use that you have it at. So I'm enjoying these products. I enjoy these little light primes. I'm finding they're a lot more enjoyable for me to use than any zoom and give a much better video effect. So the other thing I'd like to talk to you, now we've spoken quite a bit about lenses, is the new release of the Z8 potential. Now Nikon Rumors has gracefully said to us that we're allowed to talk about it now. It's quite acceptable, and obviously Nikon are going ahead with that. And it's in a development stage. Now I actually under the impression from what I've heard around that it's already actually in a production arrangement. They're just waiting on parts to actually release it so that they can have the quantities appropriate. I don't think they want to go through that whole Nikon Z9, let's wait 12 months for a camera fiasco yet again. I think they're hoping to have enough of them produced with enough parts availability that when the ordering starts to take place, within several months you can actually get one. And that's definitely more reliable and more interesting for me. So the Z8 is probably more the unit that I'd be interested in for my situation. As good as the Z9 is, there's a lot of features there that I just don't need and will never use, including, of course, the complete unibody battery grip arrangement, which to me just adds a whole lot of weight that I can't use in various applications. I'm not going to want to put a Z9 on this. That's just too big and heavy and bulky for me, regardless of all the features that it may have. The Z8 will be about the same form factor as the Z7. Even if it is slightly bigger or larger, it won't be much, insignificantly so. But it will have most of the effects from the Z9 that I actually going to find useful and apply to my use scenario. Predominantly so, I'm assuming it will have the new 7 processor, which of course that'll help of course with the autofocus and various functionalities. I believe it'll have maybe a higher megapixel rate. So they're talking about it being similar with the Sony A7 Mark IV. So I think that camera is a very high megapixel camera, 62 megapixels or thereabouts. So I imagine that the Z8 will have something very similar. I wouldn't be surprised if they go a little higher to 65 megapixels, or they may have a whole new sensor altogether. So could they use the Z9 sensor? Well, I don't think you're going to get that stack sensor. I think you'll get a more conventional sensor because they're trying to cut the costs down. Obviously, they're saving money with the body being smaller and the no battery grip, but I think that they will trim some of the video and photo features from the Z9 down, dumb it down a bit. You'll probably get just a standard processor, standard sensor, maybe 45, maybe 65 megapixels, depending on which way they want to run with it. Be honest with you personally, do I need 62 megapixels or 65? No, not really. If I want to increase my megapixel range, what I tend to usually do is photo stack. So I'll take multiple photos, stack them together in Photoshop and end up with a 200 megapixel file. So to me, that's really a little bit of advantage. The whole point of a reasonable megapixel camera like the Z7 here, which is about 45 megapixels, is that I get a quality and decent image on the go, and I can crop in when necessary. So the Z8, whatever megapixels it ends up having, whether it be somewhere between 40 and 65, I'll be happy with that, whatever they happen to decide. But I'm not punching or looking for massive megapixels. I think that that's overrated. You end up with really reducing the quality, the overall performance of the camera. It slows it down. You get dumbed down options because it just can't perform as fast in processing and ability for storage, and I think it just makes it all more difficult. So it's a little bit of luxury and extra megapixels, but it's a whole lot of loss in features and functionality. And certainly image quality when you think about things like diffraction and the darkness factor and ISO poorness. So let's just have a look at hoping that it's around 45 megapixels, but just basically we want a more simplified version of the Z9. Obviously we're not stupid, we don't realise it's a cheaper camera. It's going to be saving probably about $2,000 Australian or around $1,500 American less than the Z9, so it will be cheaper, therefore you're not going to have all the same features and abilities, but it should still be an exceptional camera. It'll be something between the Z7 II and the Z9. Somewhere in that ballpark in between is where the Z8 will be, but in a more reasonable form factor that you want to carry around with you. So I think that's a great option. I'm excited about that. I'm excited at the fact that it has a smaller form factor, and very happy over the fact that it will have a lot of the Z9 features that are actually relevant to the average consumer. So guys, I briefly mentioned their photo stacking when I talk about high megapixel photos, and that's also relevant with wide angle photography as well. Let me please illustrate what I'm talking about. If I physically show you, you'll get the point a little better. So if I'll just take my camera off here. There we go. Now, right now I have a 20 millimeter lens on, which is, I consider it a wide angle. It certainly is, but it's not as wide as say a 14 mil. When you get the 14 to 24, obviously that's a lot wider. But when I need super wide photos like that, rather than actually buy a lens that I'll use 2 or 3 times a year if I'm lucky at 14 mils, because to be honest with you, I really don't do a lot of ultra wide photography. I am not a professional landscape photographer. Nor am I a real estate photographer that needs to get small rooms into the shot. So what I tend to do is when on the odd occasion I want a wider shot, I tend to use this technique, which is rather than take one photo and I've got a horizontal view from 20 mils, if I need ultra wide beyond that, I will turn the camera up in portrait mode and take 1 photo, 2 photo, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. If you use a tripod, it's a lot more sturdy and consistent, but if you just frame yourself well with the camera, you're holding it steady and calm, you don't change the settings, and you make sure that you're always focusing on the same thing, the same point. So the subject maybe is a tree in the middle of the scene. Make sure you're constantly on that tree for focus. Just your focus, shoot, just your focus, shoot, just your focus, shoot, and keep all the settings the same. You can merge these in Photoshop, these half a dozen, 8 images, whatever you take, and you'll end up with about a 20 megabyte photo, but it'll appear to be something of around 12 millimeters. So it's super wide, and then you can crop in to suit yourself whatever you like. So a lot of people forget that that's actually an option you get with your Photoshop software, should you be using that. It doesn't matter which brand, it could be DaVinci Resolve or anything else, Capture One, they all do it. So I talk about Photoshop because I'm an Adobe user. So anyway, if you do that technique again, well, I'll just illustrate where you could use it on a tripod, you could use it handheld. Focus on one single point, shoot, focus, shoot, focus, shoot, focus, shoot, focus, shoot. You're just shifting the frame. So we're not talking here about one frame and there's the other frame and there's the other frame. I'm talking about overlapping frames. Overlapping, at least 50% overlap. And take 8 or so of those, then merge them in Photoshop, which is a very quick operation. It might sound intimidating, but it's actually not. You will have a look at any YouTube tutorial to tell you how to do it. It's only about 3 clicks of the button and you're there. The program itself is fully automated, so you just choose the style of collaboration you want of these photos and images, and it'll do it all for you and give you a processed image. Then you can just crop that to the various size that you happen to want. But it'll be an absolutely magnificent shot, full of detail. You'll get, well, 5 times the detail that you would have got from a simple 14 millimeter on one click, because you've now got so many different megabytes of files there all merged together. It's razor sharp and super wide. So this is something to consider. I'll show you a few samples of this that I've done in the past and how well it works. So it is a very functional system, and so, you know, I don't use ultra wide lenses. I'm not begging for a big 12mm or something like that I'll use 3 times a year and get all dusty in the cupboard. I think that's a better technique to use with whatever lens you already have. So whether you've got a 24-70 or the 20mm like I have, they're all very versatile and usable in that format, and save yourself a ton of extra money just spending a few minutes in Photoshop, merging these pictures together and getting it as wide as you could possibly want. And so last but not least, just summarizing on more Nikon camera gear and releases, we've had obviously a few beautiful releases recently. The 400 2.8 with a teleconverter. Now that's, in Australian dollars terms, we're talking $24,000, which is an outrageous amount of money. And then of course they've just released the 600 version, very similar. So you've got a 600 f4 with a teleconverter. So inbuilt. Now that's a magnificent lens for a sports action photographer, wildlife photographer. If you're a full-time professional, there's no problem spending the $50,000 on both of them. It doesn't matter because that's your business. That's business expenses, and that's fair enough. But for, say, you and me, the average prosumer or consumer photographer, pro amateur, that's just crazy money to spend on a lens. So I'm never going to buy one. I think they're a brilliant unit, like engineering-wise, they're magnificent. But am I ever actually going to want to own one? Probably not, because I just won't get the value ever back from it. More likely, I would buy something like the 400mm f4.5. That could be useful. I could see application with that, and or perhaps the 800mm 6.3. There's a long waiting list still to get those, but that when they are available is a great option, I think. So that's good value for money. It's $10,000, it's not cheap, it's still a lot of money, but I think the value you're getting with that is much better than the $26,000 lenses that are really a niche custom user application. So they're great, but on that subject of various lenses they've released, I was just illustrating recently this 70-200 and how versatile it is. Excellent portrait lens, but with a slight modification, something that you may already have. Now this lens is something that a lot of people can afford and would have. It's not cheap, it's a S-series lens. It is definitely a pro level lens of the holy trinity of lenses. It's about $3,000 to $4,000, depending on where you're buying it from and what country. So it's got some dollars associated with it, but it's affordable because it's a mass-produced item. It's a lot of sales are expected of this unit, so it's a very good chance you could be owning one of these and have one in your possession. If you do have it, please think about not buying the 400 f4.5 or, for example, the 100 to 400 if you already have this unit. And the reason I say that is because for the sake of around $1,000, which is a fifth of the price of those other lenses, a fraction of the cost, you can buy yourself this little 2x teleconverter. And this 2x teleconverter is probably one of the greatest teleconverters ever built of all time. It is absolutely magnificent in its functionality. It doesn't create any loss of image that I could tell discernibly. If there is any loss of image quality, it's probably about 5 to 10%. Really, it's quite negligible. You could barely notice it all. So let me just work out how to actually fit this thing, because everything's upside down again. Here we go. It was that quick to attach. I'll just make it safe. But once you've got that on, this now has gone from a 70 to 200 to 140 to 400mm lens at 5.6 as its widest aperture. So at 5.6 and 400 mils, that's pretty much the ballpark of those other two lenses that I mentioned that are specifically this size. But the problem with those lenses is they don't end up in the blink of an eye as a 2.8 70 to 200. So this is an awesome portrait lens, an awesome festival event wedding lens. But to be able to just click an attachment on and in a few seconds you've converted it now to a wildlife sports action camera, well, why wouldn't you do that instead? So as I'm saying, if, and it's about the context, if you already own a 70 to 200, as this one is, the S lens version, please consider buying the 2x teleconverter rather than buying an entire new lens for your sports wildlife, because I just don't think there's the value in that. This performs extremely well with the teleconverter. You will not be disappointed, and you save yourself a small fortune. And then you've got two lenses in one. So rather than having just one long lens, you've now got an excellent all-purpose festival, event, wedding lens as well, and you've killed two birds with one stone, one amount of money. So just something else to keep in mind. So you have a good time with your photography, guys. Waiting on some new announcements and events to come through, and I'll make some more videos soon. But in the meantime, thank you for your time and patience with me, and I hope you have a wonderful photographic experience.